Here we go.
Hi, my name is Terry the Pine Beetle.
And I'm Jared the Pine Beetle.
And I'm Larry the Pine Beetle, and today we're here to talk to you about the Roosevelt National Forest.
To get started, we'll be talking about some of the history of this national forest. For almost 13,000 years, this area has been home to Native Americans, fur trappers, homesteaders, livestock ranchers, tie hikers, loggers, miners, and recreationalists. This protected area was set aside during Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. It was originally named the Colorado National Forest in 1910, but the 815,000-acre parcel was renamed in 1932 in honor of President Roosevelt. During the conservation era, President Roosevelt at the time set aside 230 million acres of public lands for conservation efforts as part of the U.S. forestry program he created. This protected area was set aside during Theodore Roosevelt's presidency as part of the Medicine Bow Forest Reserve. It was originally named the Colorado National Forest in 1910, but it was soon after renamed in 1932 in honor of President Roosevelt. The protected area was created by President Theodore Roosevelt when he created the present day U.S. Forest Service in 1905, which is an organization within the Department of Agriculture. Much of this process was not contested, as this era in our government was known as the Conservation Era and had nearly unanimous support throughout Congress in favor of designating some more land to be recognized as national parks and national forests. Another reason as to why much of the process of creating national parks and forests was not controversial was due to the fact that many came as executive orders directly from President Roosevelt. The IUCN category that this protected area falls under is Category 6, as are most national parks in the U.S., meaning it is a protected area that authorizes sustainable use of natural resources. Some of the indigenous history about this national forest include the fact that Native American heritage was significantly overlooked during the creation of this national forest. Roosevelt's attitude toward Native Americans was along the mindset of being in the way and hindering the ability to set aside land for federal ownership. This land is primarily the ancestral homeland of the Ute and Arapaho tribes, but it also included many more, such as the Cheyenne, Apache, Comanche, Pawnee, Lakota, and more. Many of these people were displaced when their homeland became property of the federal government, but the Roosevelt National Forest still remains to be a conservation success.
I'd now like to tell you a little bit about how the park utilizes management systems. Pine beetles remain one of the biggest issues facing not only Roosevelt National Forest, but many forests here in Colorado. One way the Forest Service has seen to manage this threat is to remove already infected areas of trees. They have also begun using trap trees or decoys to try and stop an infestation where they find larvae and bait the beetles, and then once infested, destroy that tree. In a small scale, some of these methods of pine beetle removal have been successful. However, on a grand scheme, due to the beetle being able to reproduce quickly as well as causing severe damage, it is a continuing problem that continues to desecrate our national forests. The type of tools used to manage this or other related threats would be management zones, trying to seclude infected areas or damaged areas and allowing for attempt to control the invasive species.
And now we would like to discuss some of the management principles that apply to this national forest. Number one, dealing with threats such as pine beetles and other things may require long-term activity. This applies to our protected area because protecting the forest from the mountain pine beetle has been an ongoing process that will continue into the future. This is important to the threat at hand because we need a long-term plan to be able to get rid of the mountain pine beetle and make the forest safer and to ensure that it does not return. The second principle is that threats to protected areas are inevitable. This relates to our protected area, as Roosevelt National Forest is indeed a forest, and there is little to nothing humans can do to prevent natural disasters, such as nature-caused wildfires, from occurring. Fire will always be a looming threat to a forest, regardless of whether or not it is a national forest or not. There are other natural threats, such as pine beetles, that are outside of human control, and although we can take precautionary steps to try our best to eliminate these threats, they will remain prevalent within the protected area. Our third principle is that effective community education may help to reduce threats to PAs. Although there is nothing we can do to prevent naturally caused threats, there are steps we can take to prevent human-caused threats, such as human-caused wildfires that are started due to ignorance or lack of common sense or education. One example of how community education can reduce threats to PAs, specifically in the case of wildfires, is the environmental messaging of Smokey the Bear. Everybody knows Smokey the Bear and that only you can prevent wildfires. The infamous slogan of this lovable mountain bear in overalls helps bring awareness to people about precautions we can take to best avoid wildfires as a general natural threat to the Roosevelt National Forest and surrounding areas. The three threats that we have discussed within our protected area are the Rocky Mountain pine beetle, wildfire, and an increase in human activity.
One of the biggest threats to the Roosevelt National Forest and forest here in Colorado in general is the mountain pine beetle, or the MPB. Due to the MPB killing many trees, there is currently a threat of them falling on people, structures, or just animals, or just falling down and dying in general. There is also an abundance of good fuel for fires in places where forest fires would be harmful, such as populated areas.
One indirect threat that is caused by an increase in these pine beetles is an increased dryness of the ecosystem due to the growing number of dead and nutrient depleted trees. This not only decreases the biodiversity and plant growth within the forest, but can also indirectly influence a higher risk for severe and dangerous wildfires.
As you can see here in these slides, this is what a forest that has been ravaged by a mountain pine beetle looks like. And an underlying cause of this threat can be that large trees attract the beetles, and a significant drought affects the trees, like the droughts we've experienced in recent years in Colorado, which allows them to become more vulnerable to the pine beetles. And lastly, the winter low temperatures have also been rising, which allows the beetles to thrive.
The history of the mountain pine beetle is long. It has been in Colorado since the 90s, so many people here in Colorado know about it and have experienced this, their forest dying. But it wasn't acted on until it affected people living in populated areas. Also, the winter low temperatures slowly rising over time has allowed the MPB to survive later into the year in Colorado, making it do even more damage.
As you can see in this photo, this is a popular spot in the Roosevelt National Forest up the Poudre Canyon known as the Mishawaka. However, ravaged forests with lots of diseased trees affected by the pine beetle often look like this when a group of pine beetles get together to munch on a tree. Thank you for listening to Terry, Jerry, and Larry, the Pine Beetle Gang, talk about the threats that we can pose to protected areas such as the Roosevelt National Forests.
And these are the sources that we used for our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.